At the peak of the frenzy, WeWork carried a $47 billion valuation, and Adam Neumann stood in front of investors talking less like a landlord and more like a man with a revelation. He spoke about community, consciousness, and changing how human beings live and work. Then the filing came out, the numbers landed, and the glow vanished almost overnight. This wasn't only a startup collapse. It was a belief machine that nearly pulled Wall Street into a fantasy. And to see how that happened, we need to go back to the man who learned very early that selling a feeling could take you almost anywhere. Adam Neumann was born in Israel in 1979, and his early life never stayed still for long. His parents split when he was young, and by his early 20s, he had lived in 13 different homes. That kind of instability can leave a mark. You learn how to enter new rooms fast. You learn how to read people. You learn how to make yourself felt before the ground shifts again. Years later, Adam would talk again and again about belonging, about togetherness, about building places where people felt connected. That language sounded like branding, but it also came from somewhere real. Part of that story ran through a kibbutz in southern Israel, where communal life shaped daily routine, shared work, shared space, shared identity. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? Adam liked the closeness of that world, but not the idea that everyone should end up the same. People who knew him later described a tension that never quite left him. He wanted the warmth of community, but he also wanted hierarchy. He wanted people gathered together, with him at the center. After serving in the Israeli Navy, he moved to New York and enrolled at Baruch College. He didn't follow a straight path there either. College mattered, but New York mattered more. The city gave him a stage, and Adam knew how to fill one. He was tall, loud, restless, and hard to ignore. Even before the billion-dollar story, he had that rare skill some founders have, where a room starts leaning toward them before they've proved much of anything. One of his early ventures was Crawlers, a baby clothing company that sold tiny pants with built-in knee pads. It sounds silly because it was, but the product almost matters less than the performance around it. Adam could pitch weak ideas with total conviction. He could make something flimsy sound inevitable. Crawlers never became the big win he wanted, but it exposed a pattern early. The product could wobble. The story had to soar. Then came Miguel McKelvey, and this changed the shape of everything. Miguel was calmer, quieter, and trained as an architect. Where Adam generated force, Miguel gave it form. The two started Green Desk in Brooklyn in 2008, an eco-friendly co-working business built around a simple idea. Take underused office space, redesign it, divide it up, and rent it to small businesses that needed flexibility. It was practical. It was timely. And after the financial crisis, it made sense. Landlords had empty buildings. Startups and freelancers needed cheap places to work. Green Desk gave them light, openness, and a cleaner, more modern feeling than a normal office. It worked. That mattered because it proved Adam had found a real business, not just another pitch. But success on a manageable scale never seemed enough for him. Green Desk got sold, and that might have been the sensible ending. Instead, Adam and Miguel took the same basic model and stripped away the modesty. They built a new company around a bigger promise, and even the name told you where Adam wanted to take it. Not me, not office. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? That was the moment a useful business started drifting toward myth. WeWork opened its first Manhattan location and immediately understood something most office companies never even tried to sell. Space wasn't enough. People wanted atmosphere. They wanted to walk into a place and feel sharper, younger, more connected than they did at home. or in some tired sublet with bad lighting and old carpet. So WeWork gave them glass walls, open tables, bright kitchens, soft couches, and that familiar startup look before the rest of the market fully copied it. Even the words changed. Customers weren't tenants, they were members. That one choice did a lot of work. A tenant rents. A member belongs. At the basic level, the product solved a real problem. Freelancers, early startups, and tiny teams needed flexibility. They didn't want long leases, surprise bills, furniture costs, internet contracts, and all the little headaches that come with a normal office. WeWork packaged all of that into one monthly payment and made it feel easy. Show up, open your laptop, start the day. But the real hook wasn't convenience, it was emotion. The buildings carried a mood. You walked in and got the sense that people around you were building something. And maybe you were too. Adam understood that part better than anyone in the company. He didn't pitch WeWork as dressed-up office space. He pitched it as a cure for isolation. Work had become fragmented. More people were freelancing, starting companies, working alone, or trying to invent careers that didn't really have names yet. WeWork told those people they didn't have to do it alone. You weren't renting a desk. You were joining a network, a tribe, a future. It was a simple promise, but it landed hard. Especially in cities filled with ambitious people who were lonely in ways they didn't always admit. That same promise pulled in employees. A lot of the early staff were young and willing to give everything to a job if the job felt like it meant something. WeWork knew exactly how to meet that hunger. The hours were brutal. The pay often didn't match the workload. But people were told the stock would make it worth it later. And more than that, they were told they were helping build something history would remember. A normal company asks for labor. WeWork asked for belief. The result was intense almost immediately. Teams worked late into the night, opening new spaces, hauling furniture, painting walls, fixing last-minute disasters, and then celebrating together when the doors finally opened. The company encouraged that blur between work and life because it made loyalty stronger. Your coworkers became your friends. Your office became your social world. The company stopped feeling like a place you worked and started feeling like the main setting of your life. For some people, that was exciting. For others, exhausting. But even the burnout came wrapped in the language of mission. Adam kept feeding that mood every chance he got. He called the company a family. He talked about changing the future of work. He talked about human connection as if desks and common areas were only the beginning. And when investors came by, all of that got turned into a live performance. Employees were told to energize the building. Common areas filled up. Music went on. Drinks appeared. Conversations got louder. The point wasn't to fake a business that didn't exist. The point was to heighten the feeling of one already in motion. Investors weren't only meant to understand WeWork, they were meant to feel like they'd stepped into momentum. That approach worked almost too well. Big-name backers started lining up, and each one added more weight to the story. Serious money made the dream look safer. If respected firms were buying in, then surely this wasn't just a slick founder with great timing. It had to be more than that. But underneath the glow, a problem was forming. The company was expanding, yes, but the promise around it was swelling even faster. And once belief starts outrunning the business itself, almost nobody inside wants to be the one to say it. At some point, WeWork stopped being judged by what it did and started being judged by what Adam said it could become. That shift changed everything. His biggest move was simple and bold enough to bend the conversation around the company. WeWork, he insisted, was not a real estate business. It was a tech company. That sounds absurd when you strip it down. WeWork signed long leases on office buildings, spent huge amounts redesigning them, then rented that space out on shorter commitments. That is real estate. More than that, it's a risky version of real estate because the company carried fixed obligations for years while members could leave far more easily. If demand slipped, the costs stayed. Adam knew that. He just knew something else too. Tech companies got treated like tomorrow. Real estate companies got treated like property, and tomorrow traded at a much higher price. A normal office company got measured on lease risk, margins, occupancy, and whether it could survive a downturn. A tech company could lose money for years and still be praised for growth. Because investors weren't buying the present, they were buying the chance that one day scale would crush every rival and profits would show up later. So Adam kept moving WeWork into that category, over and over. He called it a physical social network. At times, he compared it to Airbnb, at others, Uber. The exact comparison didn't matter much. What mattered was distance. The farther WeWork could get from the word landlord, the more room there was for fantasy. That fantasy got institutional backing fast. Benchmark helped bless the company early, and after that came money from firms and banks with names serious enough to calm nerves. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan. More capital, more prestige, more proof for anyone watching from the outside. Because once enough respected players buy in, people stop asking the clean question. They stop asking, is this business being described honestly? Instead, they start asking, what are these smarter people seeing that I'm missing? That's how the narrative protected itself. Nothing fundamental about the company had changed. The leases were still long. The build-outs were still expensive. The revenue still depended on filling physical space, city by city, floor by floor. Yet the frame around those facts had changed so much that the same business now looked like something almost untouchable. Losses became evidence of ambition. Burn became evidence of expansion. Exposure to downturns became a temporary detail in a much larger story. There was an uncomfortable comparison sitting in plain view the whole time. IWG, the parent company behind Regus, had operated in the same broad category for years. It had more experience and, unlike WeWork, actual profits. If investors had wanted a clean benchmark for what this type of business looked like in the real world, it was right there. But WeWork's valuation ran far past it. That gap should have triggered alarm. Instead, believers treated it like confirmation that Adam had discovered something older companies simply couldn't see. Few people realized that the valuation itself became part of the product. Once the number got high enough, it stopped being just a financial estimate and started working like validation. If the company was worth that much on paper, then Adam must be a rare founder. If he was a rare founder, then the strange language, the huge losses, the category confusion, all of that could be forgiven. The number made the story feel finished before the business had proved much at all. And Adam had a way of wrapping that number in words people wanted to hear. He didn't talk only about occupancy or leasing strategy. He talked about human connection, shared purpose, and consciousness. He described WeWork as if it sat at the center of some social shift that was bigger than offices. That language did more than inspire. It made doubt feel narrow. If you questioned the economics, maybe you were missing the point. Maybe you were stuck in old thinking. Maybe you just didn't understand where the world was going. That was the real trick. It wasn't one false claim. It was an entire climate where ordinary scrutiny started to look unsophisticated. And for a while, that was enough to keep the money moving. Then Masayoshi-son entered the story. And belief stopped being fuel. It became acceleration. Then Masayoshi-son stepped in, and everything got bigger, faster, and stranger. Adam had already learned how to keep investors leaning in. Masa turned that into rocket fuel. He had a legend around him because of Alibaba, and he liked founders who sounded almost irrational. Not careful, not grounded, bigger than that. Adam was exactly that kind of bet. Their 2017 meeting says a lot. Adam expected a full pitch. Masa only had about 12 minutes. It didn't matter. Adam started talking about global expansion, human connection, tech, and how WeWork could reshape life itself. Masa barely seemed bothered by the gaps. He saw force, not discipline. Soon after, SoftBank put in $4.4 billion. The cash mattered. The permission mattered more. Adam now had the backing of a man who rewarded extremity, and inside WeWork, that changed the whole mood. Think bigger, move faster. Don't slow down to prove the model. If anyone wanted to talk about controls, margins, or whether this business should act like a normal company, that voice got quieter. Adam took that as confirmation. WeWork expanded at a speed that looked glorious from the outside and reckless from the inside. New markets opened, hiring exploded, cash burned, side bets piled up, Meetup, Wave Garden, gyms, housing, schools. The center of the company got blurrier every month, but the blur itself became part of the pitch. If it looked scattered, Adam could call it imagination, and his own ambitions were getting harder to separate from fantasy. He talked about living forever. He talked about WeWork going to Mars. He talked, incredibly, about becoming president of the world. That sounds like a joke until you realize people around him were expected to nod and keep moving. Looking back, this was where myth stopped sitting on top of the business and started driving it. Masa didn't create Adam's instincts. He amplified them. He told a founder already drunk on attention that the real problem was he still wasn't crazy enough. And after that, almost nobody inside the company had the standing to say no. By this point, WeWork didn't only ask people to work hard. It asked them to give themselves over to a feeling. The company built rituals that made a job feel like devotion. Loud all-hands meetings. Thank God it's Monday. Summer camp with concerts, booze, cheering, and Adam talking like he was leading a movement, not an office company. Alcohol sat near the center of all of it. Tequila flowed through meetings, retreats, and parties. For some employees, it felt loose and fun. For others, it felt like pressure disguised as fun. When your job is also your social life, your friend group, and your shot at stock wealth, going along starts to feel less like a choice. That's why former employees kept describing WeWork as all-consuming. People worked there all day, socialized with coworkers all night, and some even lived in We Live buildings. The company kept moving into private life, because private life is where loyalty gets sticky. You're exhausted, underpaid, and stretched thin, but everyone around you keeps repeating that you're building the future. After a while, you stop testing the story. You live inside it. Then Rebecca Neumann became harder to ignore. She brought more spiritual language into the company and pushed the place further from business talk into belief talk, energy, consciousness, intention. People weren't just good or bad fits, they had the wrong energy. That kind of language sounds harmless until it starts shaping promotions, influence, and access. Few people realize that spiritual language can work like management pressure, when nobody can pin down what it means, but everyone knows it matters. So when WeGrow appeared, it fit the bubble perfectly. A co-working company opening a school should have sounded absurd. Instead, it got framed as the next step in changing humanity from the ground up. The same control showed up in smaller ways too, like the meat ban. Employees were told they couldn't expense meals with meat or serve it at company events, all wrapped in moral language about the planet and consciousness. Meanwhile, Adam was seen eating meat himself, and the hypocrisy kept stacking up. He preached we while leasing buildings he owned back to WeWork, putting himself on both sides of the deal. He flew private while talking about shared sacrifice. On one Gulfstream flight to Israel, crew members later found a cereal box stuffed with marijuana after Adam and his friends had spent much of the trip smoking. The plane left without them because the crew feared getting dragged into an international trafficking mess. That's not eccentric founder behavior. That's the kind of story that tells you the people at the top had started thinking ordinary rules were for other people. Still, many employees stayed, not because they were foolish, because their friendships, hopes, routines, and stock dreams were tied up in the same place. Leaving didn't feel like quitting a company. It felt like losing a whole world. But outside the walls, patience was running out. In 2019, WeWork finally hit the moment private companies can dodge only for so long. It had to open the books. It had to show the public what was actually inside. And that's when the whole performance started to rot in daylight. The S1 should have been a sober document, the kind that explains the business in plain terms and lets investors judge the risk. Instead, it read like one last shameless attempt to keep the spell alive while the walls were already shaking. Near the front came the line people still remember, a dedication to the energy of we. That wasn't just weird, it was revealing. The company was still trying to sell a feeling in a document meant to explain money. It still believed vibe could overpower arithmetic. It still believed the audience might stay enchanted long enough to ignore what came next. Then the details started landing, and they landed hard. The filing showed a governance structure built around Adam, not around the company. Rebecca's role in helping choose a successor looked absurd. The self-dealing around buildings Adam owned and leased back to WeWork looked even worse in black and white. Then came the detail that turned the whole thing from inflated to shameless. Adam had sold the rights to the word we back to his own company for $5.9 million. Think about that for a second. A founder preaching community, sacrifice, and shared destiny had quietly found a way to bill his own company millions for the brand wrapped around all that language. It was so brazen, it almost felt fake. But it was right there in the filing. Then came the losses. In the first 6 months of 2019, WeWork lost nearly $690 million. No amount of soft language could hide that. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? This wasn't disciplined expansion. It wasn't temporary pain on the way to dominance. The company was bleeding at a rate that made all the talk about consciousness and mission sound like cover. Underneath the mood boards and the glass walls sat a business chained to huge long-term lease costs, while many of its customers could disappear fast if the market turned. That had always been the real danger. Now anyone could see it. WeWork had loaded itself with fixed obligations and then pretended flexibility was a superpower. Public investors saw the imbalance right away, and unlike private backers, they weren't trapped in the romance of the founder. There was also the accounting spin. WeWork tried to dress up the numbers with its own adjusted metrics, the kind of thing that can survive in private rooms where everyone still wants the dream to work. Public markets were colder. Analysts started pulling the document apart line by line. What once sounded visionary now sounded slippery. What once passed as ambition now looked like evasion. And almost overnight, Adam's image flipped. The same founder once sold as a genius now looked like what he had looked like to skeptics for a long time. A salesman with too much power, too little restraint, and a habit of enriching himself while everyone else carried the risk. That was the break. WeWork hadn't suddenly changed. Adam hadn't suddenly changed. The mask had just come off. And once the public got a clean look, the performance stopped working. After that, the valuation didn't drift down. It fell apart. Once the IPO stalled, the pressure inside WeWork turned savage. For years, Adam's excesses had been waved away because the valuation kept climbing. and everyone around him was getting richer on paper. Now the number was collapsing. The headlines were brutal, and the board could no longer pretend the founder was somehow separate from the disaster with his fingerprints all over it. SoftBank, which had helped blow this story into the sky, suddenly needed a reset. In September 2019, Adam Neumann stepped down as chief executive. That should have been the part where the man at the center of the mess finally took the hit. It wasn't. Instead, he secured one of the most offensive exits in modern startup history. SoftBank came in with rescue money to stop WeWork from running out of cash, but Adam still walked away with a package reported around $1.7 billion. Shares, fees, support for the loans tied to his stock. It felt less like accountability and more like ransom. The founder, who had preached "we" to employees for years, took the golden parachute, while the people who believed him got thrown into panic. And that betrayal is what made the collapse sting. Employees had accepted lower pay because they were told the stock would make it worth it later. They worked punishing hours because they were told they were building history. They blurred work and life because the company encouraged them to. Then, when the fantasy cracked, thousands were left staring at layoffs, dead stock dreams, and a company that suddenly dropped all the talk about family. Adam got cash. They got consequences. The paper value collapsed, and with it went the lie that Wall Street had spotted some hidden future. Under pressure, WeWork snapped back into what it had always been: an office leasing business with too much overhead, too much ego at the top, and no protection when reality showed up. SoftBank had to sit there and fund the wreckage because walking away clean would have meant admitting just how badly it had misread both the business and the man running it. WeWork eventually reached the public market through a SPAC in 2021. But by then the magic was dead. The stock slid, the business shrank, the confidence was gone. Then came the final humiliation. In 2023, WeWork filed for bankruptcy. After all the language about elevating consciousness, after all the talk about changing how humanity lives and works, it ended the same way a lot of over-leveraged real estate stories end, with debt, panic, and the courtroom. And that's the part people shouldn't miss. This wasn't just one loud founder going too far. Employees lost jobs. Stock options turned to dust. Investors took giant write-downs. Landlords got dragged into the blast zone. Adam didn't build that fantasy alone. Plenty of powerful people wanted it to be true, badly enough to fund it, repeat it, and protect it. Right up until there was nothing left to protect. WeWork showed what can happen when charisma gets mistaken for substance, and when powerful people decide a beautiful story matters more than a durable business. If you want more stories like this, subscribe now and watch the next one, because Wall Street's hunger for vision didn't end when WeWork fell apart.